So I will start. I think we are, I have not the overview of how many people are actually in the...
44.
Well, that's pretty good. Let's see.
Welcome, everybody.
Yes, welcome, everybody. I think it's really nice that we have also people that usually don't attend. I think that's a really nice, maybe one of the nice collateral of doing this kind of events online is that actually I shared the event on various social media and offered people to actually attend via the Zoom, and then many people that actually would not be able to come or to see it were actually interested. So we actually have quite a bit of external audience, which is great, I think. So I will very briefly do a small introduction of the sessions on territory, urbanism beyond technofix. So this is the fourth out of 5 sessions. And we had Theo Deutinger, which discussed human range and his book, Handbook of Tyranny. We had then Iris van der Toen and Nana Verhoef, who discussed concepts for mobile architectures together with Benjamin Dillenberger. So we already there tried to break a little bit the boundaries in the disciplines, because Iris van der Toen and Nana Verhoef are media theorists and philosophers. So it was interesting to actually start to see how a conversation could unravel there. The previous talk was Ola Söderström on the politics of technological fix in South African and Indian urbanism, together with Daniela Zetti, who is a historian of technology, and Jörg Strollmann, a professor of urban design. And Ola Söderström is actually a professor of social and cultural geography. So he discussed smart cities and the kind of narrative around smart cities. So it was very interesting. Of course, this was the first session which happened online. So we already had a lot of aspects revolving around the crisis that somehow percolated into the conversation. And I think with Ines' talk, this would of course be the case as well. So it's our great pleasure to introduce Ines Weizman, who is a director of the Bauhaus Institute for History and Theory of Architecture and Planning, and professor of architectural theory at the Bauhaus University Weimar. She's the founding director of the Center for Documentary Architecture and the editor of the recently released publication Dust and Data, Traces of the Bauhaus Across 100 Years, published with Spectre Books. She edited several other important books, Architecture and the Paradox of Dissidence, and Before and After, Documenting the Architecture of Disaster, co-written with A.L. Weissman. She has worked on exhibition and installations such as Repeat Yourself, Law's Law and the Culture of the Copy, which was exhibited at the Venice Biennale in 2012, and solo shows at the Architecture Center in Vienna and the Buhl Center at Columbia University in New York. And she curated a series of CD exhibition titled The Matter of Data, show in Weimar, Tel Aviv, and Berlin. So welcome, Ines. Joining the conversation after Ines' talk, we are very honored to welcome Diana Alvarez Marin, who's an architect and a doctoral researcher at the chair of digital architectonics here at ETH. She's the co-author of the book A Quantum City, Mastering the Generic, around which she developed her PhD, Atlas of Indexical Cities, articulating personal models of the city on generic infrastructural ground. And her research explores the role of urban actors under the light of abundance of information and computer literacy in the constitution of personal models of the city, bridging between the centralized and the decentralized approaches dominant in the state of the art. And she has collaborated on several publications around the same theme, including the Atlas of Digital Architecture and Architecture and Naturing Affairs, Media and Architectonic Concepts, both upcoming. And then finally, we are happy to have Elli Mosayebi joining us for this conversation as well. Elli is an associate professor of architecture and design at ETH, and she maintains in her work a close relation between practice, research, and teaching. In her research, she explores European residential construction since 1945, looking at the forms of housing found in model dwelling and examining the conditions under which they came into being, with the notorious parasite on the roof of the Hill building as a, let's say, live research. She's also the co-founder with Ron Edelar and Christian Interbenzin of Edelar Mosayebi Interbenzin Architects, based in Zurich, and the architectural practice actually places emphasis on urban design and residential construction, and won the Swiss Art Award in Architecture last year. And this is actually what you see here on the screen, which is being currently installed for the Swiss Art Awards in June. So you will be able to see it.
It was postponed to September, but
okay, so you will see it in September.
Yeah.
In any case, so here you have a kind of pairing of people who have different onlook onto technology, and we're very much looking forward to the conversation, also in the light of our current conditions. So thank you very much to Ines for accepting to join the call, and to Diana and Elli for accepting to join the conversation, which will be moderated by Professor Milica Topalovic and myself after Ines' talk. So with no further delay, I stop sharing my screen and would ask Ines to actually, oh, yes, okay. So Ines, if you can start sharing your screen. Then we
I have to, yeah?
Yes, you have to. I mean, you can do without slides. There are people who can do without
Normally
slides
we would welcome a guest with an applause. I don't know if it works.
Yes, raise hands, raise hands. So very nice to be invited to this wonderful round. And I have to say it's also, do I hear others? I have to say it's also for me exciting and new and strange to speak in this kind of format, and I hope it will work. And yeah, I would have loved to be actually in Zurich now, at least be nervous in what to dress up. I mean, now you're kind of just showing this part, but I think there's something missing, and let's see, I think we have to learn how to run these events. So yeah, I would like to start actually in this talk with kind of let's say a point exactly 10 years ago, which also affected us all, which was the volcano eruption in Iceland, where all of a sudden our airports didn't work anymore. The planes were grounded, and we had to find another way to travel. And I think it was maybe also kind of an announcement to kind of to prepare for such a situation, for this kind of lockdown. On the other hand, we have historically obviously had several of such extreme situations, epidemics, but also here 400 years ago, the so-called small ice age, something which is very beautifully represented here in this painting by Hendrik Averkamp, and discussed actually in the book by Philip Blom, which I'm happy to have just read, that it is now translated into English as well, where he speaks about the little ice age and its transformation, actually cultural transformation, and the effects, which are actually, it's also one of the reasons, possible reasons for this kind of ice age, for the absolute cooling, disastrous cooling of the environment, were volcano clouds. And yet he was kind of, he describes very beautifully also some of the effects. One of the negatives, horrific effects, are persecutions, witch hunts, that started actually from the experience of this enormous cold, which was reported that actually birds had fallen from the sky, and it was yeah, something which reminded us maybe of last year's events in Chicago. But also he tells the story of Descartes, who's actually sitting on an oven, in a warm place, because it is so cold, when he actually introduces or begins to write his Discours de la méthode, which is actually also a very important moment to change the gaze to a more scientific, attempted, objective view at the natural world. It also, this kind of moment in which we are now we are seeing each other in multiple Zoom screens. I can switch this off, but I see quite a few of you, and it's quite amazing. I think if I would normally give a lecture, I might not actually see anybody in the crowd. Now I see you maybe even closer, because I see, if you didn't switch off, I see your reactions, and it reminded me of the film by Kiarostami of 2008, Shireen, where he actually films into the cinema. We only see the woman in the cinema watching a film, and we see their movements, we see them crying, we see them being affected by it, being laughing and happy. And I think it's also is for me an image in to read actually the kind of the media with which we are working at the moment, and how it actually, we still have to see how it affects us, how we are changed by it, what kind of new positions we develop and methods, maybe the same kind of kind of reflections Descartes would have done. I wanted actually to speak to you, if I had been there, and I will of course still speak about the book that was published last year, Dust and Data, Traces of the Bauhaus Across 100 Years, a book that had to be written in the 100 years history of that school, and also was a result of a conference. But it began actually already with, or the idea was to kind of to describe a spectrum between dust and data, between the material and the immaterial. And somehow, strangely, I have actually in it an article there in which I kind of hang the 100 years history onto the experience of the Spanish flu, and the kind of the repercussions we can maybe draw from that into the 100 years perspective of the Bauhaus. The chapter actually starts with the story of an enormous locust plague in Syria, Palestine in 1915. There was actually already a previous one in 1899, one in which actually Bedouins had excavated by chance. I actually wanted to bury a body. By chance, dug a hole and found actually a sculpture with a human face. And they were so scared of it, they closed it immediately. And right after, so Max von Oppenheim told, a huge locust plague came about. And it was actually the story that also caused Max Oppenheim to go to this place and to visit the Bedouins there, who were begging him to please excavate all these strange creatures that seemed to be under the ground. And it was actually the beginning of an enormous excavation project that Max von Oppenheim started to bring about. I don't know, I could give maybe another lecture on the story of the Tel Alaf excavation, although there's quite a lot of research being done. As you know, eventually Max von Oppenheim will manage to excavate all of these, or a lot of them, brought them to Berlin, where they actually, in a fire, were all destroyed and had to be put together piece by piece, because they were from basalt stone, and they got really, really hot. And when the fire men came to extinguish the fire, they actually broke it with the cold water. All these amazing sculptures actually got destroyed. So now there's a fantastic project also presented over the last 10 years to actually to bring these sculptures together, to actually piece them together one by one. For me, it's fascinating to kind of to revisit this same plot, something that we could find in the Berlin Museum, but also in the London Metropolitan Museum, and some pieces have still survived actually in Aleppo. But to actually to read this excavation again with the locust plague that came back in 1915 and had affected actually the whole of Palestine. In Jerusalem, one can still see, or kind of they produce these before and after photographs of how devastated actually nature was from the attack of these locusts. So while the locusts were actually visible, one could count them, one could actually even extinguish them with all sorts of machine and fire. What one could not see was the, like today, were the bacteria of the influenza plague, this pandemic that had actually passed incredibly quickly across the globe, so fast that actually overlapped also with the events and struggles of the First World War, to a point that these two numbers merged, and it was very hard to actually or like nations did not care much to distinguish between the numbers of death from the plague or from the flu in relation to the numbers of the war dead. That's why we're in a very vague terrain. And what we also find, or I kind of try to find much more imagery around the Spanish flu in Germany. And it's very surprising that one cannot actually find a lot of material around that, photographic material of the city in preparation or protection from the flu. One of the famous victims of the flu, there were many famous ones, and don't want to recount them here, but for my case was Sir Mark Sykes, one of the British diplomats, who was actually part of designing, together with his French counterpart, Picot, the so-called Sykes-Picot line that divided the Middle East to actually in the middle of the First World War, which then was later ratified during the Paris conference in 1919 in Versailles. We see actually Sir Mark Sykes in his last 2-3 days. We see him here already very thin, and he will be a victim of the Spanish flu. He dies in Paris and will actually be taken to his home, because he was an aristocrat. They did not throw him or bury him in a mass grave, but actually put him into a lead coffin. And the lead coffin was actually something that, sorry, I will come back to the lead coffin in a second, will actually preserve his body, to which I will come back. Interesting is that this Mark Sykes, he was kind of fascinating also because he traveled the Middle East. He traveled through Turkey, and was actually, most likely he has also met Max von Oppenheim, and was probably in the same places where, or maybe even on the ground of Tel Alaf, because we can read in his diaries that he has traveled through the same region. He goes around with his camera. Here he films his wife on a horse, but also the Bedouins here are on water wells near Tel Halaf. So this is actually from a photograph taken by Mark Sykes. It's interesting that actually these two figures seem to overlap. When Mark Sykes returns from his travel once, he returns to his house in Sledgemere, which had been completely destroyed. And he orders that the whole house will be reconstructed to its original state, but he will also add another Turkish room to his residence, which clearly shows that he was actually impressed and fascinated by his travels, and actually takes these oriental features home. So in Sledgemere, there's also this chapel, which is also where he's being buried. And it became actually interesting in 2008 when the SARS virus broke out. And a scientist from London had actually decided to excavate this very same grave, because apparently this body promised to hold the data, the information of the virus still preserved in the lead coffin. So it's interesting that the 2008 SARS virus actually takes us back to tell the history of the Spanish flu virus of 1918. And yet again, this very same virus is reappears in 2019 with another variation. And as we read now, something very strange happens, that it's actually a virus that can change. This recent virus can change between being living and being an object. So we have actually a history here to tell along those, the history of these virus outbreaks and mutations that might relate to our own architectural and urban history. So for Weimar, or the Weimar Republic, as I said already, it was surprising that we have sometimes so little photographs. And if you look at some of the hospitals, like here, a veteran hospital, which was right in the building of the Bauhaus in Weimar, we are surprised not to see many masks, the images we expect for the Spanish flu. There's actually a series of photographs that were collected by a colleague of mine in Weimar, Norbert Korek, who actually for years collected postcards of war veterans. And it's really fascinating. These photographs show that actually, while the Bauhaus was opened under Gropius in April 1919, the building was still in use in the upper floors by this hospital. So the idea that, like, on the one hand, we see on the background, we still see the paintings of the previous institution. But we see also the school completely differently inhabited. But we could also think to reopen this whole field of the history of this place, and to actually something which now looks so shiny and bright and nicely white painted or repainted, these famous wall paintings by Herbert Bayer, to actually see them again in their materiality, something that was discovered in the 1980s, when all of a sudden the quality of the walls itself became important and relevant again, by taking really studying the the walls, what they were hiding, because the images of these Bauhaus features had been painted over in the following decades, or right after the Bauhaus actually left the school. That's something that is discussed in the Dust and Data book, and I don't want to go into that history, but it's kind of something about the methodology of rereading the history of modernism and the history of the Bauhaus that takes us actually right into the chemical layer and microscopic analysis of material remnants, something that is both dust and data. So yeah, the kind of the investigation of the blue has deeper layers, which might take us actually back into the history of the Bauhaus at that very first moment in 1919, which was both like a kind of coming from the war, kind of finding a refuge for many of the students, but also teachers. But if we see it now in our perspective, it's also fascinating to think of what comes after that kind of lockdown, after the kind of the crisis. What enormous works have been produced at the school or in other similar schools. But also if we imagine the kind of medical papers that were circulating in the building, it might be interesting also to think of studies such as Ernst Haeckel's, which was produced in Jena, not very far from Weimar, and published in Leipzig. Some of his studies here on the fluid crystals, and we could be reminded of also of Gropius being part of the crystal chain letters correspondence, where they were all fascinated by crystals, and let's say also this kind of the idea of that object that has both kind of objective qualities, but also seems to grow, the idea that actually there is some fluidity between them. Or we could go all the way back to these very beautiful drawings, actually still drawings here from microscopic studies of Robert Koch around 1876. Actually, somebody who was very much involved also in the development of photography and scientific photography around the same time when actually art historians were becoming fascinated with the medium of photography. Also in Weimar, there was actually planned during the Bauhaus weeks, 1923, the presentation of an educational film on fluid crystals. So there was also the idea to, the film wasn't realized and was also not shown in this week, but it shows that actually students and teachers were fascinated by the kind of scientific studies, but also to study scientifically, to find actually methods that that they would borrow from scientific research. We have here Laszlo Moholy-Nagy's photograph, actually his studies through a micro photograph structure of a wrapping paper, or something that he develops in the later books von Material zur Architektur to really to study textures of materials, something which he will obviously introduce in his pedagogy, in his teaching at the Bauhaus, which also is a chapter in the book by Joyce Tsai, which tries to actually bridge that, or kind of discuss the transition of Laszlo's arrival from the war into the Bauhaus, and the kind of the bodily wounds he brings into the school, and that actually make up his wounds, but also the wounds of his from others are also making up the kind of the atmosphere at the school. So there's also this the kind of the scientific approach towards study of forms, of colors, the idea that it's possible to record, to also to teach art in a new way. All that kind of scientific research mirrors and reflects into the studies of the Bauhaus, but also the kind of the experience directly from the mechanics and impacts of the First World War will become an important feature for, or kind of an inspiration to think about performances, about different kind of machineries, something that here, like Yuka's lamp that actually has something of a military vehicle or even a gun translated into that practice of the Bauhaus in these early years. But we could also go back to the idea that actually those war wounded were actually coming back from the field, from places that are not only in Europe, but that are actually further away, and that we're actually, I don't have the kind of the student that might have been, that would have been nice to actually to have here the student who was actually participating in the last battle on a river, on the Jordan River, against the Ottoman Empire. The British Australian forces were here fighting the Germans, which were fighting together with the Turkish. And one of the last gestures the German Turkish forces leave is to destroy the bridge that is leading over the Jordan River. It's actually a bridge which we can see in an aerial photograph later. We are crossing now the Jordan River with today's still green line to the occupied territories, the Golan Heights in Israel, where we actually see two buildings. One is a British customs house, so a border building, and the other one, which we see here on the right, is actually a French customs house. And both actually explain that this must have been the border that was drawn by Sykes-Picot through the landscape. What looks actually flat here in a bit of a close-up is actually a very hilly site. Here I flew with a drone over that bridge, and we come actually to the hilltop where the French customs house looked in 2013-14 like this. And I had the chance to actually visit it. There's some of these archival photographs show that the ensemble was much larger, but also that actually it had actually a modernist architecture. These buildings are already destroyed, but there are some features in the building that presented as a possible Bauhaus building, something that kind of would be actually the normal recognizable features, perhaps. And yet we don't know when exactly the building was built, but from its style, I would kind of not take it all the way to 1919. I think it's a later 1920s architecture. We don't know the architect. It has actually these kind of functionalist features, which we see in many places in the Middle East. Actually, when you drive around, I feel there's almost like a typology of these kind of official buildings. And we need to think that these are actually the French, let's say, occupying that piece of land and actually bringing in a very kind of functional military or administrative architecture. But the story of this building interested me because actually the owner had invited me to discuss this building and to actually help it to receive a Bauhaus history, which I found striking. He also had already found a place in a hotel magazine in Israel where he could announce it as a boutique hotel, a Bauhaus boutique hotel that would actually attract tourists into the Golan Heights, into this occupied territory. Today, the site looks like this, quite beautifully renovated, but you see also that it's renovated into the Bauhaus style. I had actually been there shortly before the opening in July 2019, and it was still in a kind of a yellowish tone. And right with the actually opening of more Bauhaus buildings in Tel Aviv, after they had been renovated, the owner decided to actually paint these buildings in white to fit the Tel Aviv white story of the Bauhaus, which is another story we will have to look at. But problematic, obviously, is on this with this project is that we have a so-called Bauhaus building, which is not that actually is a French building, and it shows actually something else. It kind of points us to a completely different history that actually is between the French and the British, rather than Bauhaus history that would relate us back to the story of Tel Aviv, that actually tries to relate it back to Germany and the emigres who came from Germany. Yeah, one of the highlights of this project, and probably perfections for the owner of this complex who wanted to open now the hotel, was to also complete it with the Bauhaus logo that was quite directly borrowed, if not stolen, from the Dessau Bauhaus. It's the kind of the role this building will play in the politics in this territory in the Golan Heights has still to be discussed, but already with the very opening there were encounters with the military personnel that were visiting this place. A strange location to actually place the Bauhaus that far out of its context, or yeah. So we have actually on one place of Israel, we have the Bauhaus trying to cross the border, actually opening. We could also turn it around and say, actually, it opens into a completely different discussion, namely into the kind of the similarities to something that cannot be divided, like the history of the virus that is borderless, and that's the international style, or kind of that architecture that is internationally exported and imported and used actually here for colonial empires. So that Bauhaus is actually on the other side of the border and enters it actually, let's say, from Lebanon, Syria, which would then, for me, also in the chapter I have in the book, be the kind of the invitation to look at that part of the border much closer. But on the other hand, it takes us, it tries to relate back, that building here on the Golan Heights tries to relate back to the building in Tel Aviv, the Max Liebling House, which I have had the chance to quite closely observe, first with students from Weimar, and then with the Center for Documentary Architecture, which is a group of researchers, architectural historians, architects, recently also coders and programmers, with whom we have actually studied this building, but also expanded on it to look at other building biographies in the way we have studied this Max Liebling house. So we looked at this building as kind of like similar to the one in the Golan Heights, through its historical layers. And it's fascinating because this building was actually due for renovation in 2015 for the city of Tel Aviv. The city of Tel Aviv wanted to have a building that would be inviting historians and preservationists and cultural exchanges into this building to discuss actually the history of the UNESCO protected city of Tel Aviv, the white city of Tel Aviv, and to actually renovate a building for this purpose, which is actually an apartment house that contained so many fascinating stories and already had different uses, and to turn it actually into a cultural institution. So this, we were lucky to follow this the renovation and restoration of this building quite closely by visiting very often this place and being in good contact with the curators and preservationists who were actually doing the renovation of this building. It's a building by Dov Karmi, who is actually not a Bauhaus architect at all. He studied in Belgium with another group of interesting young modernists who trained there and came to Palestine. So it doesn't really fall into any of the histories of the Bauhaus exile to Tel Aviv, of which there are actually very few architects that actually came from Weimar, Dessau, or Berlin. We actually were interested in the materiality of this building, what the kind of the patina of the walls were hiding, and how deep we could actually go into this building to understand its history, and by understanding the history of this building and its material, also to understand the history of the city of Tel Aviv and the region, and something which we did not quite know at the very beginning, but how much actually it brings us back to revisit German architectural export and industry in the 1930s. So one important way was to kind of study together with preservationists the fabric of this house, to really study its various layers, its the history of various uses, and to actually get back to the original, something that would take us again into the microscopic layer of reading the city. Also, because we were for 2019, we had an exhibition actually planned in Weimar at the Bauhaus Museum, and another one in the Max Liebling house. We actually at some point we were worried in how to capture the colors that were about to disappear. So on the one hand, reading them was one thing, but to capture them either through photography, but one could do it also with little color pigments that are collected in little jars and glasses. And so we came up actually with another idea to turn it into a carpet, to conserve it into a carpet, of which we produced two in collaboration with a weaver and the color expert. And obviously, in relation to the microscopic studies we had done on this facade. And it actually shows this carpet itself shows the color white. It gets whiter and whiter on the top, which is actually the very recent whitening of this part of the building, which is actually here a balcony that was studied. And we can see how colorful it had been throughout its history, and it changed actually more from a kind of a yellowish ochre into the present white. This is a kind of, this study we had shown actually in two rooms, two carpets, of which one carpet ended up in Weimar, another one in Tel Aviv, which had actually the colors of the interior. It was exhibited in Tel Aviv like this. What was important for us was to actually to look into this building and to see it both as a microcosm and as a macrocosm. So we studied its materiality and began to trace them. So one story which was also revealed by preservationists in the house, and there's more research being produced at the time, was actually that some of the building elements, something like this door handle here, had German speaking like little inscriptions. Here it describes the kind of the Nick seal, kind of the cover, very specific for actually a German door handle developed in Germany in the 1930s. And it became actually strange to discover more architectural building elements that had been apparently sent from Germany in the 1930s as part of the so-called Havara agreement, which was an agreement to help actually Jewish emigres to leave Germany and to escape Hitler Germany. But on the other hand, the deal was that building products would be imported in large numbers into Palestine. So strangely, at the very moment when actually products from Hitler Germany were boycotted internationally, they were imported to Palestine. So that gave obviously this kind of historical fact and agreement gave rise to yet again to understand really the composition of materials, and to go back into laboratories and into the most fine-grained machines that would actually tell us about the history. And we had of various materials. And we had in Weimar just received in the university a new machine, which was not yet even explored, what you can do with it. It's more kind of, it works on the level of nanotechnology and was actually meant to work differently. And we came with this rather big piece of terrazzo that had broken off in the Max Liebling house, and we had to break it into even smaller pieces and to try to read actually its very microscopic structure to end up in a research that shows that most of the white spots we're seeing here actually are traces to that kind of show white cement, which is actually a material produced in the only developed in 1934-35 in Germany. And so it's actually very surprising that it made its way already so quickly to Palestine. So and somehow this kind of these two, the microscopic layer with the kind of the geographical layer, this mapping of this site in the Golan Heights all of a sudden could be read together, because both relate all of a sudden to material transports and logics across, or logistics across borders. So we have here on the, obviously, the British and the French customs house are there to control and interrupt the trade between both sides of the division of the Sykes-Picot border. So for us, it became both like a theme to a kind of an essay that we translated actually into a film that we showed here in Weimar, kind of much bigger screens, and actually the way we wanted to present it, together with a model of this building, because somehow in this house we could see all the other stories that to which we could relate the geographies of modernism. But also we were trying actually to tell we had a vast amount of materials from interviews, from studies of building elements and archival studies, and actually to bring them all into a kind of an let's say into a narrative. We used actually the architecture of the building, through which we then created several routes and that were guided through 4 different themes. And this is something you can maybe at some point figure out on the website. This is all so far open source, what we could put. What was actually for us important was then to relate that story in Tel Aviv to the story of other research we had done on buildings that are now international examples. Obviously, we try to be borderless, and also translated actually city names into geographical codes. We flew a series of drones, always with drone flights, always with the same choreography. They always went exactly 100 meters up, and then turned around to become actually a view from above. And we created a whole archive, which we hope to still continue. But it always begins with the story of a building that then, over its very details, its architects and materiality, would kind of connect to other, let's say, similar histories, or it might become, or hopefully it will become possible to read, let's say, histories much more across between those buildings. Okay, this is something to study. I don't know how much time I have, but this is actually a series of films, and sometimes it's we have different data entries. There might be biographies, histories of individual people, but also fragments collected from various buildings here. If you remember my pleasure in researching out of flows. So I'm sometimes coming back, and we're still collecting some of these figures and fragments, making it possible to either study very much in detail, but also to be able to reconstruct larger environments at some point. Trying to stop this here. Seems not to be able to. Yeah. Okay. So in the exhibition, or in the kind of the also the items we have uploaded in, made accessible in the website, it's always possible to move from, let's say, the material artifact into the digital. So we have various objects already as exemplary features on our exhibition table. That was actually the view into this exhibition in Weimar. We could show it again in Berlin, and then each time we actually presented it, it had a different kind of layout. I mean, it's slightly changed, but also more research. And here we were actually much more looking into the history of this the building transfer and from Germany via Britain, the British mandate into Palestine. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, what is really important, especially with this history of the Bauhaus, would be really this trying to bridge, kind of to allow research coming from both sides of the unbridgeable, so far unbridgeable borders, to actually ignore the political borders while still being able to research across. So we are actually here last time in our drone flight in the Golan Heights, and we're actually looking now towards Syria, Lebanon, which I thought is actually the kind of view and research this project invites us to do. And I have actually, we're in the center, we're working at the moment on another film and research on the relation between different architects who were actually crossing the borders in the Middle East in the 1930s. Ah, yeah, we have here the last Bauhaus features, strangely going down into the dust. Okay, I'm ending here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Amazing. Well, thank you very much. If you like, you could stop sharing your screen so that we have a more a larger palette of our audience as well. Well, I thank you very much for this talk. I think that you touch upon many topics, and I would be curious to actually open straight up the conversation with our guests, because I think, so maybe just to say there is one of the questions that has been going across these sessions on territory and this lecture series, which is the question of does technology have politics, which is something that we have tried to address by also dragging a few colleagues that are working more on the very let's say technical aspect of architecture, when we have our colleagues from ITA, the Institute of Technology of Architecture, and we confront them with this kind of question. Also questioning this narrative of progress and so on and so forth. So I think that is just one of the questions that is one of the meta questions that we want to discuss. But I think that both Elli and Diana have, let's say, in their own way and in their own work, let's say, aspects that are bridging towards yours. So I would perhaps ask one of you, and then maybe Milica can also complexify the topic.
I just I absolutely agree. I think it's an interesting question to start with. And you said, Ines, that in this case technology is a way or is a perspective that can, for instance, trace architectural history across borders that would otherwise present, to say so, a certain obstacle to certain, let's say, historical narratives. So by going to the level of the microscopic and you know, we are able to, let's say, trace the material histories that otherwise wouldn't be available, right? And I think so this is a kind of a beautiful perspective for architecture, and I think we can indeed start there. I mean, I think apart from I think the question of politics, or what is the politics of our use of technology, let's say, in and I think each one perhaps can reflect on your own work. I would, before you start, I would just like to ask the students and everybody who joined us. So each of you who is comfortable with showing yourself and perhaps your personal space or your background, your photo background, please do so, because you know, we all struggle to have a bit more embodied experience, and it's a pleasure to see anybody, you know, instead of having this kind of a very strange black square with a kind of a acronym on it. So it would be really great to see you, actually.
I see some people with
everybody,
very nice
everybody.
background.
Thanks for that.
Great. So maybe Elli, would you like to pick up the word?
Yes, thank you so much for this very interesting lecture. I learned a lot on one hand, and there are so many questions on how do you actually find your material. I mean, this is something that is really exciting listening to do, how you kind of come up with one topic and kind of jump from one topic to the next one. And I was wondering, I mean, maybe it's a kind of a meta question as well, but before jumping into the actual topic, because I myself, I'm quite interested in the topic of how do you build up a narrative when you explain architecture. And you started to build up a quite particular narrative, and I followed you, and at the beginning it was quite peculiar, you know, how do you jump from one to the next. And of course you always, you know, it was like circles, no? Mm. And then, of course, this is also a methodological question. How do you actually proceed in this kind of research? Because, of course, you have your microcosmos and you have your macrocosmos. And, of course, it's about kind of finding the threads in between and kind of making sensible comments. So maybe we can start with the question, how do you actually develop your research, and how do you proceed? Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice that you saw it also as the kind of the circles coming back, and sometimes they're shorter circles, sometimes larger, and yeah, but this is really the way I try to keep working with like similar material, and sometimes it kind of like it goes off a little bit from its path, and tries a little bit a different, like it's maybe less circular. It takes a more flattened way. But yeah, the kind of returning to the same subject, I think, is important for not only my research, but also the research we do in the Center for Documentary Architecture, because we kind of, sometimes it's a film and it develops into, let's say, a publication or into an exhibition. And sometimes you discover similarities in a similar topic. And yeah, and I think what's really fun to be also in a larger group is that when we can begin to intersect research, right? To really find overlaps and new kind of nodal points on which we kind of collaborate. But also it's a kind of the idea, this is what where I also presented the carpet. It's also there's something trying to be a bit performative about finding research, right? Making it the ground in which you can research, which is, I mean, it's on, yeah, a bit kind of awkward also to make the space to kind of to come up with the need that we need to now study colors and thread and yeah, dyeing products, and to kind of slightly twist away from the research question, and yeah, to kind of to regain also breadth and research space.
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe I could, if you agree, I'm curious to ask, because this is a kind of perhaps another way of asking the question about the circles. So you started this research obviously several years ago, and you produced this let's say wonderful book and an exhibition about 100 years of the Bauhaus, and then came the pandemic, right? And then suddenly you had a whole new way of looking at your own work, right? And this sort of puts you into another circle of telling the story, right? Or kind of looking at the whole body of work. And I'm curious, how did that let's say, how did the pandemic transform your own view of your own work, right? So I think it's perhaps interesting question also for Diana and for Elli as a kind of a self-reflection, because I think it's a kind of incredible, in fact, perspective that is opened up, and your example really shows it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was surprising that once the book was out, I thought we are done in the
Yes,
spectrum
exactly,
between
yes.
SARS and Spanish flu. And it's kind of eerie to see that the next chapter was already waiting there. So, or that actually the circle would be fully closed of 100 years. Very, very strange. But obviously that's the fun of it, to kind of like we could read history, I guess, by several volcano outbursts or pandemics, and to actually shift a little bit our temporal boundaries from which we would see a transition. No? And as this, I mean, that's also fascinating about the Spanish flu, that its history has been so, or kind of its historiography has been so overlooked, or could not be fully apprehended already in after 100 years, and we are still trying to figure out how many actually died. So the numbers are between 50 million and 100 million, and it's kind of a considerable difference. And it's kind of very strange that we know so little, and maybe even the kind of the research that's done now will shed a light on that, on these figures.
I mean, do you see now in these past few weeks, let's say, new perspective on that book or on that research that you did? Because I kind of constantly kept thinking while you were talking, because my impression is that, of course, your story was really about, as you have shown it, the geographies of modernism, and about the links cross-border, and kind of tracing those material histories that are captured at the atomic level, literally, right? But now I think the pandemic also introduces completely other levels of social questions, political questions, that I think we are suddenly able to see as parts, as I think perhaps also as part of the history of the Bauhaus, right? So I'm curious, are there perhaps some new questions that are triggered for you in your own work through this few weeks that we have just been through, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, already when I look at when I try to bring the figures, because I try to get back to the same microscopic level of the Spanish flu microscopic photograph, like we had it in the cement. So already there, I just to kind of to verify, or to kind of to research this deeper, I get into a whole world also of microscopic photography, also the kind of the architectural, the urban change related to the virus, right? The whole discourse on hygiene and cleanliness that might be, done at
Exactly.
the
I mean,
Bauhaus.
we
It's
feel
kind
like
of,
we have
I mean,
told these
maybe-
stories so many times, and then suddenly, I mean, I have to say, I first time hear that Bauhaus was actually founded in a former hospital, and I really never knew that fact, right? And I just find it so incredibly kind of
important,
direct, you know, in terms of the discourse on hygiene, right? And also thinking then of our own situation where we will have to, let's say, reproduce hygienic rules in the weeks and months to come, and how this might shape our own, let's say, practices. Elli is
No, I mean, I think this is really super interesting, and I also really appreciated this part. And maybe just talking about kind of this relationship between, you know, a pandemic or a flu or whatever kind of an illness, how then the reaction of society is kind of, you know, bringing science in, you know, to kind of find a solution and to solve it. And you started also your lecture with the book by Philip Bloom, sorry, which exactly explains this story about kind of the small ice age then being actually the cause of a new movement into science, a more rational way of thinking, you know, to explain actually what has happened. So this is really interesting, and I mean that goes also back to the question that Milica asked. Now, what do you expect now? This pandemic, what will it cause then again? No, and in the end, I mean, you know, in a way, we are at the moment in a huge crisis, but the crisis, I mean, it's since the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, we are in a constant crisis because we don't know what the situation is going to be in the future. I'm talking now about, you know, this problematic of ecology and climate change. And I mean, experience that in many studios, for example, science is coming back, you know, and architects do not design, but they research before they design. So, and what you were saying about Bauhaus, that they did scientific studies and they also wanted to study scientifically, that was your words, they were that was also quite interesting that somehow that was brought into the discussions. So I mean, this is also something that we could also discuss, that how, you know, architecture is more and more turned into a scientific field by kind of being affected by this crisis in the present and also in the very present, in the epidemic situation. So this is also this kind of these reactions and counter reactions to knowledge and not knowing. No, I found it quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of jump in and tie it to other questions, I think it became, I mean, there was a moment of crisis we discussed also last week or 2 weeks ago with Milica, where we were discussing about how, you know, architecture or architects are in this moment asking themselves how they can be relevant, and then we were a bit mocking or being a bit cynical towards what kind of answers was the architecture world offering with this kind of, you know, cardboard you know, like there was a cardboard desk proposed on Dizin, which totally infuriated me because I was like, wow, this is what we can offer as a profession. Amazing, you know, like.
Amazing.
So we were really like in this discussion, and I think what happened, there are several let's say events or like twist of events that pinpoints at how actually there is a relevance, but it is not where you expect it. And there I in particular want to tie it to the research that the chair has been doing on, for instance, this migrant workers in relation to the territory in Singapore, and how suddenly this became something which is a kind of, you know, trivial in a way, something that has been overlooked, and how the government has kind of dealt with this question of labor. Suddenly this is at the forefront because revealing a lot of issues. I mean, Elli, we were talking about hygiene. How does that actually translate spatially? So just as an example, I think that there were a few other signs that were showing that somehow architectural research in particular at this very moment has actually something to contribute. And I think that this was a very, I mean, it's a very sad, but at the same time, very important case. And I would maybe hand the word to Diana, because her research is largely into this question of big data and how that also, what does it mean for cities? And I think that we've seen also in the work of Ines and what you presented, this kind of like triangulation between this question of technology, control, and data. So I would maybe be interested in hearing what's Diana's position is on that, or in relation to Ines' talk.
Yes, I have a lot to say. I think there's something really interesting when you put the two pandemias. I mean, the first one, I don't know if we can. Yes, okay, the two pandemias, the Spanish flu and the COVID-19 in parallel, because they talk a lot about our relationship to technology. If we see what happens with COVID, it became so easily a pandemic because we are in a world which is highly connected, and all of a sudden we are in a world which is no longer linear. And because of this increased connectivity, we are exposed to this, like the most improbable all of a sudden becomes possible. And I think that more and more we are exposed to these kind of things. And in relation to the role of the architect, I think what happens with the digital is that this divide that there's always been between science and humanities, this gap starts closing again, because we are no longer just in the scale of the human, but we go towards the extremely large and towards the extremely small, which means that we start talking in terms of information. And I think in this sense, you don't trust your senses anymore, because information is not something that you see, it's something that you compute, that you might render once you've computed it, but you're always working in the abstract. But I would say architecture is, I wouldn't call it a science, I would say that rather that is a discipline. And this role of the architect as the one that articulates things together, which is in a masterful way, which is the architectonics itself, it's always been there. It's just that in every body of thinking, we do it through different kinds of geometry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, just to jump back to what Elli was talking earlier about, when you were saying that the architect's research before designing, maybe you could also expand onto that in relation to your own work, or also actually the work of the Swiss art world. I think was also something that is related to that connection between technology, research, and design. Is there something that you could maybe?
Yeah, no, I mean, on a general topic, and what I'll, maybe just starting again with Ines' talk, and then I come back maybe to my own work. I really think, it's a particular way how you tell the story, and I'm quite fascinated how you pick the points, and then I'm repeating myself now, but I think it's a particular, I mean, it's also a kind of a choice, and there is a selection of information you are giving to us. And of course, there is a tremendous amount of data you have collected. I mean, of course, this microscopic view, I mean, it just gives you so much information, so you have to be quite selective. And then, the question is really, how do you find the dots? And it's of course, it's kind of a cloud, and also this archive you were showing with all these different connections between the different materials and architects, and also scales of artifacts you are gathering in this collection. It's quite interesting that, depending on your own question, you will find different answers and different storylines. So this I like quite a lot about your presentation, that its constructedness, it's quite clear, and how you tell the story, it's quite clear that it's one way to tell the story. And of course, maybe it's influenced at the moment by this kind of epidemiological view we can have on it, but we could also change it and talk about a globalized world in 1911. No, I mean, this story maybe has been told already. So, but that's an interesting way, and I think your archive allows that, to kind of come up with particular, you could also say eyeglasses or so, to kind of draw different pictures based on the same material, which is quite nice. And I really like that, and I have to think of that in another way, maybe also on the level of design, what that might mean for us. On the level of design, I think we also kind of are not anymore, I mean, I can talking about myself and my office and also my studio, we are not so much interested in kind of giving solutions on kind of on questions already being there, but finding questions also. And the problem is, how do you find a question? No, so that's so that a kind of a research. I mean, you can talk, or kind of a collection of material is important to come up with your own question, and based on that, you can find a narrative that will lead you eventually into an architecture project. And the beauty of that is that, you know, the project will kind of, you know, make a senseful thread back to this original question, but it also will reveal something that was hidden before, no? That is not visual, that was not seen, and it's, in a way, it must be surprising. So I mean, this is a way of thinking that I think it's not very historic what you've been doing. It's not, you know, if you go to the discipline of historians, probably it's not really kind of the classical way to tell a story, but I think its constructedness, and what I like quite a lot is quite honest and quite promising to tell stories in one way or another. I mean, this is really a personal feedback, but I think this is also quite open to other fields.
Although, I mean, maybe I could ask for maybe rethink constructiveness. Sorry, somebody else is speaking.
Yes.
Sorry, I have to mute somebody. No, go on.
Somebody's like, just like.
Yes. Okay, here, mute.
No, because no, if it's the constructedness could be replaced by the performative of or kind of. I mean, I think I'm both a historian and an architect, right? I'm and let's say ambitiously filmmaker and trying to use all the machines we can possibly get, right? So if I can fly drones and I love to look over the landscape from above, you know, like fly around buildings, why not use it, right? And so it was also in trying to find, let's say, in the series of 25, or I don't know how many we've actually flew through the city of Tel Aviv to construct a different space, right? And to have different observations, which were all of a sudden, which is actually, if you watch some of the drones, and I didn't have the time to go into it, but if you look at it, in some buildings, you don't just see the building, but you see the city behind, which is a completely different story, because it's not the story of the white city, it's the city of a developer agenda, right? Which is kind of completely going vertical and uses the historical city, or what is now historicized as the white city, as its kind of treasure on which you can develop the city, right? So so there are a few things we don't see when we are just historians and look at, let's say, the kind of conventional, let's say, even imagery or material we are given. So, but if we are kind of exploring between photography, film, all sorts of media collection devices we have, and kind of produce it in a way that we are, yeah, let's say, we really perform, we handle it, no? We create a space in small projects, let's say, or in various funding formats you have, or the people you can work with. Sometimes it's with students, sometimes they're more professionals, yeah, so, or we have to react to various situations, especially when we cross borders, right? So there are different sensitivities which always cause also, or kind of, we need to rethink our methods of working. And that's, yeah, so that's both the work, let's say, or challenge to the work of the architectural historian, but also of the architect. And there's something architectural, something performed in space. Like even when we are, if you look at, actually, when we film, sometimes we make a bit of a fuss. We turn around a kitchen. We did it to Ita Heinze Greenberg 2 years ago in her house, and to get the right light. And yeah, so all of a sudden you begin staging it, no? And there's something in the very staging that becomes also a part of the work. So it's not just what they're saying, it's also how we are getting it, how we're discussing it, and, yeah, which is, yeah. That's why it's the exhibition is not just the result of it, it's also sometimes used to kind of to present material differently.
Yeah, but I think it also talks about, I thought, Diana, you want to join in, of course. I will just add something. I think that there is also this question of expanding the discipline and the boundaries of the discipline, where, of course, as an architect, you can only be looked down at by all the other disciplines who are doing historical research. I mean, if you look at I did a PhD who's related to food and Egypt and territory, you know, biologists look at me and they're like, what are you doing, you know? And
now keep going with it.
No, of course. but I think it also speaks about the kind of the expansion of the discipline towards being much more able to understand that architecture is not this kind of self-standing object. I mean, I think that it's very telling how you look into these microscopic materials, and it tells you about the story of a material, and it's a story of extraction, it's a story of labor, it's a story of politics, it's a story of geopolitics. So I think that for me, it's very clear. I would tend to disagree with Elli.
I think perhaps it's interesting to try to link this to education as well, right? And to kind of agenda, because a Bauhaus is of course an educational institution, or it has been, right? So in a way there is a kind of a question, how do we educate around what kind of priorities, right? And I think this idea of let's say using technology and going on to the kind of a molecular level of architecture, you know, is one way of perhaps decentering the perspective, or you know, changing perspective, that changing the kind of a some kind of a dominant historical narratives, right? Gives us a new opportunity. I think I mean this links to Elli's like a proposal that architects are more engaged with science than previously, and I think the reason is because we are looking for different well, let's say different narratives. I mean that are historical, ethical, design related, etc., etc. I mean, in my, let's say in my field, which is to say so territorial, I mean the narrative is to say, okay, we won't be city centric, right? We will look at the territory as a kind of a unity. And I think along all those different avenues, there are different ways to I think to somehow reposition what our discipline is, right? Or to capture a wider field, and I think indeed there is a kind of a certain recalibration of that going on, and I think that this pandemic is probably going to contribute or accelerate that type of thinking. So I'm curious perhaps Ines, from the perspective of the Bauhaus, and Elli from the perspective of your own teaching, and Diana as well, you know, what are the questions that you are foregrounding in education right now? You know, I think that would be a really something that I'm also personally super curious about.
For me, a big challenge, I think, is to civilize technology, because technology is something that has become planetary. Everybody has access to it. Everybody has access to internet, to mobile phone. Everybody's able to report about things they see, they experience, about their view of the city. And I think somehow we need to find a bridge between this very objective view, for example, the view that we have with satellite images that are of course very political and very biased, but they want to show themselves as the ultimate truth, and the view of the citizens. But for this we need to understand technology better, I think. Yes, and regarding what you were saying of the architect exploring in all these fields, I think architecture I don't think it's new. I think architecture has always been this way. It's just technology that makes it do it in a more powerful way, or in a more visible way. Yeah, what I find fascinating all this work with drones, the very big, the very microscopic. But what I find challenging is how not to fall in an objectification of the thing that you're looking at, like claiming somehow that you're saying the truth about it, but preserving this possibility of making a multiplicity of narratives or a multiplicity of stories about the thing that you're working with, that you're communicating with.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I mean, if this is a question to me, then I would say one way to use, let's say, an interview would be to make it part, and that's actually something really important for us, to take what I want, let's say, for a film, because I start editing it, or I present it, like I give a clip, like a selection of it, like a little, yeah, an edited version to it. But then we try to give everything, I mean, not nonsense, like sometimes you have little chattering or something, but actually to present all the material in the database. So actually to take, but to actually to mark what we have taken and how we interpreted it. But the footage itself is also available. Yeah, so there's kind of, obviously it's very conscious if you start editing a film that you take the pieces you want from it, or yeah, from a photograph the pieces you want from it, or from a much longer interview, much more detailed discussions of a situation, of, let's say, a material. So it's kind of exactly trying not to lose too much footage and to allow still to take, but still to allow you, let's say, anybody who would like to have access to it, to follow up on that. And so to allow actually also history still to be told about that kind of footage. So the idea is that you actually stay with this material and use it actually as a database. So it's kind of a gigantic project in that sense. So to find things under a signature and others which are, let's say, more background, but available.
Elli, do you want to maybe develop a little bit on this education question?
Yeah, maybe I can just share some thoughts. I've been starting to read Donna Haraway's, to understand her idea of SF, like and for her SF means science fiction, or also string figures, or even more like scientific fabulation is another acronym for that, SF. And I think it's quite interesting because she doesn't develop it in the discipline of architecture, or for the discipline of architecture, but it fits quite well the discipline, because it's all, on one hand, it's also about kind of finding in string figures different perspectives on the same topic, kind of, you know, as you also have shown it now, Ines. Mm-hmm. So kind of, you know, in these string figures you can have, I don't know, kind of a phenomena is viewed in different perspectives, and it's not only natural sciences, but it's also like social sciences looking at the same problem or phenomenon. And this somehow enriches everything. And it's, of course, it's also kind of in her view, it's a critique towards what also Bruno Latour has said about this friction between social sciences and natural sciences, which is, of course, he is against and she is also against. So I think, and what I think architecture is really good at is bringing these perspectives actually together, because in its own discipline, it is actually the result of both views. No, it is, of course, natural sciences. It's about geometry. It's about mathematics. It's about physics. No, and on the other hand, it's also about fictions, how you tell a story, what you see. It's about art history. It's of course, it's a lot of that. And sometimes there are phases that we tend to forget about that, and sometimes there are phases that we know it and they're quite aware of that. It's also interesting if you look at how architecture has been taught. And for me, in this particular moment, I like to kind of be very precise about these two perspectives on our field, and to bring them together by actually collaborating also with experts on different fields. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But for instance, Elli, I think it's particularly interesting that you address that, because you also collaborate with artists.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I just wonder...
Yeah, but let's say I am really curious about the urgency of that approach, right? Yes. So let's say why now, right? Yes. So I think this is a quite interesting.
This is interesting, and I mean I think, you know, in the words of Donna Haraway is that, I mean, she's quite clear that, you know, the word Anthropocene, she hates that because she says it's so negative, because it's kind of this destroyed world that has now, it's even gotten a name, which she thinks is a very bad thing. So she comes up with this Kuluzine, which is not really pronounceable, but it's about kind of a positive view on the world that encourages us still to kind of fight, to see the troubles that we have been causing, but also to see potentials in it. No, and it's about kind of, you know, it's also about a positive view. No, and by her, I mean, it's beautifully how she actually writes and how she kind of brings these perspectives together. You know, but by doing that, she somehow encourages people to think differently about the facts that are so negative, you know. So it's not about a dystopic future, but it's about kind of a visionary future. Yeah, that's, I think, why I think it's interesting also for us, because otherwise we can simply give up. No, I mean.
Right. I mean, I think the visionary thinking is important, and perhaps there is a kind of a special, I mean, of course, Bauhaus is interesting. I mean, I did also myself wonder whether, you know, for some reason we have somehow, you know, for a while, maybe for some decades, at least compared to the 20th century, at least the first half of it, we have to somehow within our discipline lost a particular ambition or even a kind of training in the visionary thinking. And I think we are perhaps, I mean, this is simply a kind of a certain speculation from my side, but I think part of this corona pandemic will be the kind of a consequence, will be the kind of a certain rehabilitation or a certain let's say, return, at least in our own discourse, architectural discourse, a kind of a return to the attempt of visionary thinking, or a kind of projection of a certain long-term future. So I'm curious if that will really happen. I mean, and would it be a moment to open to audience, Charlotte?
Yes, of course. I also propose, if people feel more comfortable, to drop a question in the chat. Otherwise, just unmute yourself if you have, or if you would like to contribute also some thoughts. It doesn't have to be pure questions. Is it a too intimidating platform?
50 people in the room.
50 people in the room, yes.
In the meantime, when someone starts typing, what you were saying about how the pandemic is going to change our vision as architects, I find it super interesting. I've been thinking about it because I think that we are being pushed to experience space in a different way. Like no more the things that we can touch. Like I think it's been years since we've been theorizing about this blending of virtual and actual, about heterotopic spaces. And I have the impression that all of a sudden it's here and we're really living it. We are on Zoom and we are in different spaces at the same time, and this becomes totally the new norm and the new banal. This is super interesting, and like also in relationship to the city, like what used to be public space, it becomes something else now. It's almost like you reverted because we are at home, but we are being public selectively. So I find it super interesting on how the pandemic makes us reflect on these things as architects at the moment.
Does anyone want to share a few thoughts about how the pandemic actually makes us rethink about architecture? I think maybe for some of the students that are here, this would be an interesting thing to hear from you. Pum, pum, pum.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, everyone is like tetanized. Okay, but then maybe just I was also pondering onto like this question of how what has actually changed spatially with the pandemic, and I was wondering if maybe there were also things to learn from like the historical onlook onto the Spanish reaction, like the Spanish flu in reaction to in relation to our situation. I mean, Ines, you were just talking about this change of use and how we didn't know, for instance, that the Bauhaus as it was a hospital before. And I just wonder, you know, what does it mean for research that, because we talk now about how great and how timely certain topics are. So that was like the good thing. So Milica's, for instance, the research on Singapore and the migrant dormitories, or your research on the Bauhaus and this kind of incredible link to the pandemic of the beginning of the past century. So I think these are interesting story. But then there is another entire story, and I had to find myself writing an article about a research that has been that I conducted in Berlin on the real estate of Berlin, and then I was actually frozen in my tracks because I was like, how can I write now something, because I was writing something like, since the past 2 decades, Berlin has been experiences a boom of construction. And then I was like, well, but what's gonna, you know, what is the relevance of my current research right now when it will be published in, you know, 3 or 6 months? And then I'm talking about something that's gone. I mean, the current boom that Berlin is experimenting at this very moment is something that might very well be a thing of the past, in fact, right? Because we hear about this kind of economic situation and so on and so forth. So maybe it would be interesting to hear from your point of view how to actually, you know, where do you position yourself when you work on this in this condition, if this is something that maybe we could explore a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. It's I think it needs us all to go on a shrink to kind of to actually think, or like the idea that we have to write something that is meaningful now. Right? So how do you relate anything you're doing now to if it actually also, it's like, it's not only that the condition of life changes, but we have quite literally threats on our life, right? Each one of us has maybe thought, what is this pain around me? What's like my family? Like, how does it affect us? And what's the kind of work I do in that time? What's the last thing I would do? So it's kind of, it got a little bit existential as well at some point when I had a bit of fever. So I know I had that thought. So which of my essays I should just cross out. So yeah, and obviously for now, as I had ended the year with this research on the Spanish flu and let's say a bit of SARS, it was kind of, for me, it's kind of this trajectory to stay with it, no? And to actually to think how to, again, to go another circle, which Elli described, and to this, to enjoy even more the kind of the possibilities of the media that are left for us. So it's kind of, we're getting more concentrated on what is accessible, why is it accessible, why is it not accessible, usually why it's not accessible. And we might understand also much more about the politics of things, right? Like an open museum, how many people would actually read the captions, where things are coming from, where they come from originally. But now if you go into online, let's say, image archives, or kind of even academic essays, you have to figure out who owns them. So why are they not all public use? No, so maybe you had also some more openings because like to data archives because of the crisis, which is a positive thing. So, but now wonder, why would you close them again after the pandemic, right? Why would you? So, so there are a few things that are being explored as a kind of a laboratory situation, and maybe to. I mean, for me, it's really important now, like as what also Milica said on the question on pedagogy, no, and the way I try to present it in like the full spectrum of embracing the media, right? Embracing both the love for an archival footage, right? Let's say it's film, it's a photograph, it's a very old photograph. And then I want to find out where it's actually coming from which collection. Yeah. So how far can I get back to it? But also to embrace, yeah, everything we can do as researchers. Yeah, what we can find out, and that is actually something we need to see in history, right? How kind of let's say the relation of art historians with photography is incredibly fascinating. How people like Panofsky were writing on film and or saw film in Dürer. They're kind of fascinating encounters of let's say the expert with the media and teaching through new media. So it's both the rereading of material through new media and presenting it differently to let's say to students, but also obviously to a larger public as well.
I mean,
We have a question, Milica.
We have a question. I mean, I just wanted to, before, because I see Anna Maria is also my student, so I will definitely pass to her. I just wanted to say that there is, I mean, I personally, I have a certain, I mean, even though I am not so much enjoying the kind of endless hours in the Zoom world. I mean, even though this session is wonderful, I mean, it's just to say so physical, you know, to say so not being able to move enough, let's say, is there is a kind of problem with that. But otherwise, I find it very. I find that I am personally somehow enjoying the role of technology much more, you know, whereas I found the perhaps over the years, you know, the kind of, you know, the different devices, the calendars, the scheduling, the increase of speed and all of that, you know, there was an aspect to technology that is very kind of intrusive and you know, let's say, dominant in terms of controlling our time and our space. And I didn't enjoy that very much, but now I find that we are also in this situation, also looking for a way socially as you know, as faculties, as students and so on, to use this media that we have much more creatively than we did before. And I quite enjoy that, right? So I think that there is something quite creative going on, which is indeed very positive. So so I hope that, you know, I have a feeling that something will stay in the use of new media that will really kind of you know, be part of some kind of a new spirit in our in the way that we do or teach architecture, right? And okay, so I think we now have 3 questions, and we are very close to the end of the session. So let's go quickly with that. Anna Maria, and then Giuseppe,
Jan,
and then Jan.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to ask all 3 questions, and then we have our guests answer, and then we have to probably finish.
Should I go, or is Anna Maria?
I think Anna Maria was definitely the first, 1748, and you are 2 minutes later.
Ah, yeah, okay. My chat, well, it was differently. However, I wait.
Anna Maria.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to throw out a thought. I think in this whole relation with the virus and the technology, and also with this lecture, I really appreciate this idea of an archaeologist. And I think we have the possibility to become an archaeologist of the digital or of the virtual. And this is also related with what's before discussed about the challenge of the future is to civilize technology. And I think there is a whole new dimension of what architecture could become in relation to this whole data which is available online. And And I think this is a question I find really interesting. And I just wanted to bring it up because you all talked about it. And I think through this pandemic, we really have the opportunity to dig into it. And it's as if there was a digital or virtual material of architecture that we didn't really explore before. So yeah, this is from my part.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great.
So Jan, maybe you can.
We have also Giuseppe, let's not
Yes.
forget him. Huh?
No.
Yeah,
Don't forget.
okay. Yeah, so there were those notions of acceleration, but also of hygiene culture coming with modernism into architecture, maybe even stronger. And my question would go in this direction of, okay, now our apartment has become maybe much more important for this period and has to take into many more functions than before. Like it has become a home office for many and so on. And yeah, I wonder also if this is maybe also a chance for architects or even a necessity to rethink maybe also housing and our neighborhoods, or the proximity which we experience these days from and within our apartments. So this is also a question maybe to Elli in a way, since she's, I think, working a lot into housing.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to proceed with the other question, or shall I answer?
Let's take also question from Giuseppe, and then we do one round of commenting.
Yes. So
yeah, my question is actually very similar. So yeah, I was fascinated by this fact that during with the Spanish fever, suddenly becoming a part of this foundation myth of the Bauhaus, and having hygiene and light as fundamental qualities of housing suddenly. Then the question to me was, if we now take COVID as a opportunity to think about a new foundation myth, then would then let's say the possibility of the private space to become more public a new fundamental feature, or what would it be then?
Yeah, if I just start with my own personal situation, I mean, I just experienced that my own home becomes also kind of a school for time to time, and then it becomes the office, and then it becomes, you know, kind of the dinner table and so on. So it somehow this kind of mingling of all these functions and also this kind of interference of public things or kind of private things, and the school teacher kind of having Zoom discussions with my son and so on, it all somehow blurs everything. That's quite interesting and also scaring, to be honest. So that's my experience in the last now 8 weeks, that everything is happening in the same place, and it's just the monitor which is changing, or the kind of the person in the monitor is changing. So maybe one, I mean, I don't know if it's, of course, it's too early to talk about consequences, but I mean, I always hated this idea that housing is kind of a particular part of architecture that is somehow excluded from architecture and has this, another role than architecture. So, and I always think that housing is just kind of one way to kind of, dwelling, the English word is nicer because it's about kind of being. No, it's not about housing as to house, but it's about being in a place, and this place provides you with different possibilities. And the question is really, is housing not much more has to be developed in such a way that you just be in a place that allows you to do these different activities that you need to do during a day, and they change within a period of the day, but also within kind of the course of a week, a course of a year, and so on. So, and this would also somehow be kind of more open as a vessel now, where anything can happen, and it's not just somehow for the family or for the private realm. So this is already happening, and I also enjoy very much. And for example, when I go to the balcony now, or I go out, I look back at my house and I see all the neighbors are at home, which never happens actually, because everyone is working now from home and they are now telephoning on the balcony with their cell phone in their hand. So it's really it's this kind of this opening up of everything. It's quite funny to kind of observe that and to think what it could mean in the future, so that it's not about it's about kind of architecture as being the place where you actually can stay and not about housing as a particular function, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, it's another take on the functional city and the functional separation, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And which seems also quite refreshing reading. I mean, you know, I didn't think of it so far, basically. And I quite enjoy these new discoveries that new insights that we are having almost every single day.
Mm.
Also, in Germany, they're discussing now the right to a home office.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's amazing. I cannot quite grasp yet what it is, but it sounds delicious to think that you have the right in the first place. So you can choose between that but you could also leave. So
But I want to mitigate a little bit the whole excitement about the home office, because personally, I have never been so unproductive in my life. Because it's not so easy to you know, I mean, balance family.
No, it doesn't mean that everybody's at home. That's not a home office.
Everybody's at home, but that's, I mean, at the moment I find this extremely, as I say, I find it extremely difficult. So just from my own perspective, I also, we were shared with Milica today an article that talks about the fact that female researchers have never shared so little material, or never published so little, submitted so little paper
really?
during this crisis. This is the
that's interesting. Yeah.
I think it's devastating. It's not interesting, but it speaks
about but the male, so the male, apparently male gender has
increased
the productivity.
That's devastating.
Male academics, that's why I say it's devastating. It's not devastating per se, but of course there is a reason why. So male academics have increased their productivity. Everyone is like, oh, this is great, I can finally work. While obviously someone else is taking care of your family situation. And of course, then the counter effect is that female academics have never submitted as less paper as ever. So I just to kind of to drag it on my favorite.
No, but for
terrain,
sure, I totally understand what you say, and I mean this actual situation is very bad, and I also, I mean, you know, I mean, there are so many negative points. I just don't want to talk about them more.
But because we were excited about the home office.
But you know, the thing is, no, I'm not so excited about home office. But the question is really, do we need to kind of, what is, I mean, you know, what is housing about? That was the question, no? What is housing
absolutely.
About?
I mean,
and it's just so boring to have these pure housing neighborhoods and then to go to, you know, that's what I was.
Absolutely. I mean, I can say a word about proximity. So we were doing a project which was finishing somewhere in January, and a part in that project was precisely discussing the fact whether we should try to have, to say so, the right to less mobility in the future, right? So this is very similar to the right to home office, because people don't want to be kind of a compulsory long distance commuters, you know, having to move, I don't know, 100 kilometers on a daily basis and so on. And so you know, in view obviously of you know, carbon emissions and everything else, it makes sense to commute less. But then how to help people, you know, not commute? Well, you know, let them have a space to work, you know, at home or close to home and so on. And so there was a kind of a very, you know, let's say attempt to make that point inside a kind of a complex project, and then bam, next week there was a pandemic, and then everybody was working at home, right? And I think it's just fascinating how so in a way the answer to proximity, yes, I think it's interesting how we are testing or being brought in a situation to just test certain assumptions through a very peculiar social experiment, and then maybe we will indeed learn some, you know, a few good things that we can apply later on.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of can I say, like dynamiting the bourgeois floor plan of the house, also, no? With the kind of, so we go back to something that was I mean, actually, previous to that, you would have people would be living in a room.
Yes.
We were talking about hygiene discussion, so the room was everything was actually happening here for reasons of, you know, financing and so on and so forth. But I also find it interesting that this kind of is all, you know, it dynamites so many, you know, ideas or like even architectural dogmas are being, you know, challenged by that. No, so I also find it interesting.
Completely, it's really a transition time. I think he will develop new ideas of what a home means. Yeah.
So I want to thank everybody for being with us together in this very transition time, because we are actually reaching our at the end of our time. I know that Elli also has to leave. Maybe we can still leave Ines to have the last word, or if Diana, you want to add something, or Milica.
No, I wanted to add on the same thing, but it's not necessary. I mean, we are over time already, huh?
We're very much on time, but daycare cannot wait. They're very strict. So I would like to thank
I just would like to really thank everybody, and maybe to ask you, Ines, if you have a moment, and Diana and Elli, stay a minute just to say goodbye.
Thank you.
Or I mean, I would like to express that you know, it has been really enjoyable, and I know how enjoyable it would have been. I mean, the idea was really to have you in Zurich and to be able to spend a bit of time also together. But nevertheless, I think it was really enjoyable also. Hearing the talk was beautiful, and it was wonderful to talk to you.
Yes.
I will ask you for the second part next time.
Yes, absolutely.